So my name is Go Hirasawa. So I curate and research and avant-garde and experimental film in 1960s and 70s. And for more 20 years, I organized the screening and research and the publication of Masao Adachi's film. And although I have not participated in the production of this film itself, but I have been involved in introduction of films for international. This film, production of this film began immediately after the shooting of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in July 2022. And despite various objections, the current government decided to have a state's funeral, a national funeral. So a pilot version of this film was screened to coincide with the day in 27th September. And the final version have been shown in the end of last year. And so this film, you have already seen this program. And so this methodology of responding to sudden political and social events through the medium of film was used by Nagisa Oshima and Koji Wakamatsu, who collaborated with Adachi during the 1960s and 70s, and has resulted in a number of important works by them. Adachi also used a similar methodology in AKA Serial Killer in 1969, which was screening before this program. The film used the cinetract practice and theory to reveal the political and social situation while provoking it. As returning to this film, Revolution Plus One, since Abe had been in power, strong power for a long time and was highly popular with new right and conservative base. Criticism of this film was extremely strong. And it can be said that the film attracted attention more than social phenomenon than as a one film. However, the final version that you have now seen not only shows the incident itself, but also the social context in which the Japanese people were praised. As I would like to discuss later in the discussion of poetry cinema, the depiction of rain and embryo, the looping narrative structure, and as the aspect of the film reflects the characteristic of Masao Adachi's film in the past. And so first step, so I would like to introduce this kind of historical background of this film.
Maybe just a short follow-up. You talked about the fact that this film was received controversially in Japan. Could you briefly tell the audience a bit about how it premiered? It was shown first on September 27th in a shorter version. Could you talk about this kind of screening which happened in the beginning?
Actually, so national funeral is kind of big state ceremony, and so people admire Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, but other people don't like to be involved with this. So Adachi organized and counter screening of this film against national funeral and state's funeral, and assassination in July, and national funeral is September. So it was difficult to show at the theater, and so Live House and other places, and so Adachi organized to introduce this film. So on the other hand, this film also was produced by the owner of Live House. So Adachi could use this space, not cinema, but Live House, to introduce this film against state's funeral.
There was also a speaker during the event in September who was attacked after the screening or during the screening. Could you comment on that just briefly?
And so actually, so basically, so yeah, Adachi is of course politically is very famous, but so as a filmmaker, so not so famous. But so major media so attacked this film because it's not good to shoot. So at the destination of prime minister, former prime minister. And so a lot of attention to this film, and so right-wing people so attack the theater and so against this this screening, and so one theater so had to be stopped and to show this film, for example. But other theater and the live house, so they could introduce this film. And then so now so some so local theater had already started to introduce this film, and then in this year, this March, and so Art Theater in Tokyo will start to introduce this film.
This program is called Reaction Shot, and we will need to talk tonight about two aspects of reacting to cinema as a public and the way filmmakers react to political realities. So it's very complex to bring these two layers together, I think, and I suggest we bring in Vadim's film right away too. Vadim, could you talk about your way of reacting to the current situation of war through this film, which was shot before the war escalated? Yes, you decided to release these images now, and also together with a comment you made, which we saw in the end of your film as a title. Maybe let's start from there.
Yes. Sorry. You can just switch on, I think.
You can take mine. I'll handle it.
Usually it should work. So since the very beginning of the war, when we left Russia, I always leave some notes like that in the end of the films to remember to like save the context of it and the thoughts and feelings that I felt then, because this escalation, this war, really changed my life and the gaze, also the images that was made before, that you said, and even then it was painful. I was shooting in 2020 in the summer, and together with the feature film Summer, as I said before, and in 2021, I think in the winter, I made some kind of a draft of it, because I was thinking how to put together my diaries, and I understood that this part is definitely another film, like short film that should be staying some kind of this way, and only when we left in Istanbul, I was like, looked back into my hard drives, the things that I saved, because for me, I already understood that one day we're gonna left Russia, and I was saving kind of my land, my childhood, or stuff like that. I was shooting a lot. In 2021, I'm projecting for example, 6 feature films. Yeah, it's really a lot, but because I wanted to save as many as I can, and it's very connected. Yeah, and when it started, it's just like, what you can do, you like putting it back, and it was just totally heartbreaking. Yeah, I don't know what to do, and I was like, was looking at these images, I was like really upset, and I still don't know what with, for example, with Kostya. Yeah, I made it because I don't know. This I think it's important to show it also another side. The guys, he was actually 18 years old. Katya was 17 years old. I didn't understand. It was really naive, and Kostya didn't know where he goes actually. And after that, he was really upset. I saw him only one time in 2020s, one time more, and he was already upset because he was like just. According by other people, he had no rights to decide anything. Then he just told me, yeah, and it's so heartbreaking that it's changed like that, and I want to show this simplicity, this guy's faces just suddenly accidentally met. I was like, I wasn't preparing the film in a way like, oh, okay, probably I shouldn't find someone it's about going to war. Not it was good guys. We just met, we talked briefly, and I started to shoot them as justice itself, as all of this, their feelings, like they're young and like have some first fresh feelings, yeah, and also it's about farewell, I'm sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to. Can you hear me? Yeah. I was also thinking about a conversation we had the other day, Vadim and me, and I asked him, you use images of the past, but you replied, for you, these images are not images of the past, but of the present. Could you talk about that, what it means for you? And could you also briefly, because you mentioned the aspect of a diary, could you talk about the way you shoot, whether this film is connected to the other films you make and how, or maybe it's also disconnected?
Yeah, for sure it's film connected somehow to my other films. In this way, yeah, I was shooting it as a diary, really simple, in a simple way, but in a way of touching, in a way of kind of this simplicity that brings you some poetical touches, and in the very structure of mini DV, I was making some films on mini DV and summer, and it's more about impression, but definitely this film for me connected to my film Orpheus, because there is about my real farewell with my land, with my ex-girlfriend, and so on. And in this film I see something that shows the safe time before the farewell, before the worst things that could happen happened. It shows this kind of found footage film already, but it's full of presence in a way, and that's time that in it becoming now even more important, because it's only one, not only one, but one of really few things that save this time of in this light, especially this light, this sunshine, so on. Yeah, and for me it's really really important, this idea of care. I always care about, and when I make documentary films, then I made a trilogy about artistic underground and Euro, like really immersive thing, and this film's kind of immersive, just immerse you directly into the group of people, just briefly like that. It's very actually how I started shooting it, and it's a very first image. It's the very first thing that I started. It's how I started the film. Yeah, I made a kind of few of such things, like when you just move in camera and here is the film. Yeah, I'm like, it's really important because this sequence never happens again. I mean, for me, I also connected always my films to the very flow of my life, to save the things in a very special moment, a very special period of my life, that the things that will never happen again, the things that in Orpheus mostly it's about farewell. You are capturing, saving something before you already kind of, but in the case of Orpheus, I already have a kind of prediction that, yeah, it's a farewell, and I'm making it, and I'm try my best to do. But here I didn't know. I started shooting this itself as it's in the purity of these things, of the emotions, of the presence, of the like capturing and all this innocence, you can say, yeah, kind of, or that we can connect always to.
Don't be so self-pitiful, please.
Okay.
Yeah, really.
What?
He's very self-pitiful.
What? But you see the film. That's really all my films is my diaries. If you don't care, you can move out. Yeah, I mean, I always do only showing the things that I saw. And the Doc Lisboa competition, I showed the film that called I Saw. If you don't care, don't care. But this turned about the cinema of care, and I'm care about the guys. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not talking about myself, but I couldn't see the things without my eyes. And for me, the film is act of seeing, as a breakage film one has a name, by someone's own eyes. It's act of seeing. If you don't like, you can move out. If you don't like how I present it, same. But for me, it's a pure experience that I capture. It saves time. That's it.
Maybe since reactions are coming up already, 2 hints. There's a audience mic around here. Right. So please wave your hand. You will be handed a mic, and you can join into the conversation anytime. I'm sure there are many reactions here, and I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about these films. I have also 2 people up here on stage who can react to the program we just saw, and I'm very curious to hear 2 things. First of all, Heleen and Ela, what were your reactions to these films, and maybe also to the films together? And have the statements which were just made about them influenced your reactions to them? Yeah.
I wished Vadim had made the last film about Kostya killing Putin using real footage. As a reaction to the war, Vadim, I kind of have to agree with the gentleman in the audience. I like your films. I think they have a poetry about them. They're really in the moment. They remind me of the poems of Boris Riji, like «Как хорошо мы плохо жили». That's what I always think about, like how well did we live badly. It's really set in a time and place in the Russian province, like one day at the dacha at the shitty lake, but there's a poetry to it. And but right now we live in a different reality. And honestly, I think just putting a title at the end of a film like this, you're an artist, you're entitled to do whatever the fuck you want. But I'm not sure that it's a powerful enough reaction to what is going on right now. But I understand your desperation, and I also understand it's very difficult to make political films about societies that are completely depoliticized. Like Kostya and Katya, they strike me as people, yes, they're unaware, they're powerless. Why? Because they do not engage in politics. Their parents didn't engage in politics. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't be saying these things because I'm not Russian, I'm not Ukrainian, I'm a total outsider. But my best friends, they're from Lviv and Vladivostok, and we all go through a horrible time right now. And of course, we can now have a heated debate about all of this and become very angry at each other. But I'm not sure if that's the real meaning of this evening, the real purpose. I mean, we're all just trying, right?
Yeah. And she said, I could change it, right? If we are really, reality changes every day and it becomes worse and worse. I could change the title, but as I said before, for me it was important to save the feelings and the thoughts, even stupid. But anyway, it was like that, like a note on it, because I make a thing, like a mini TV tape or something, and I put a note on it. And for me, it's important, like to be think about it, or to think how stupid I was to write it. But anyway, this it's really terrifying for everybody who people dying, like everything, like it's awful from any side. And and mostly the people who would like Kostya and Katya dying, like Kostya dying first, I mean, and.
But you said you haven't heard from him in a long time, so you actually don't know. Maybe he's convinced and he's going to Ukraine and he believes in the cause.
Yeah, I don't know anything about him, but I know that I don't know. I can't contact even with him because he was online last time in January 2002, and I knew that even before it was not allowed to write his real last name in social media. Yeah, and I even don't know his last name. And I know Katya. I know about Katya that she's still in Svobodny, just like open. And she get a child, I think. Yeah, she has a child now, but not from Kostya. Yeah, it's how the things turns. Yeah, completely. We live in completely different reality, and that's why for me important to show something from this past, because in all these diaries I was connected to my very also more distant past in 2000s, and I was using this mini DV also to kind of to connect to the times that actually doesn't exist, but I can like trying to think about existence of it, and yeah, but this will kind of make it double. And I made summaries, from already my 2000 when I was 8 years old and something, and I knew that I always going out from the place where I was born. Like I left when I was 16, and it's always about farewells, and here is also about farewells, and I don't have any other images. I have a film that I made in Istanbul. There is kind of first time when we left, and there was a really political action on the bus for like with the transparent, we have posters like no to war. We have but it's another thing. It's like action film, like first action that you could do. But I will think about should it be released or not, because it's everything that you can say, like not enough. Everything we can do, what we're talking about, is just images on the screen. It's just some, what is it, like lake, some boy, girl. Okay, no, it changed anything, but I don't have anything else. So the only thing that I can do is showing.
Let's hear something from Ela also.
Yeah, of course.
I'm very curious to hear more.
Reaction shot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can only say my friends in Warsaw. I mean, I am Polish American. My friends in Warsaw are continue to receive refugees from Ukraine and in their homes. So obviously, from the immediate emotional reaction, it's very hard to respond to the film. I would like to say though that. My response is also that regardless of whether that young man is now fighting in the war and is convinced, or is no longer fighting in the war and is not convinced, or is no longer fighting because he's dead or he's returned home, I'm not sure that his level of lack of political consciousness or his having the political consciousness makes him any less of cannon fodder at the end of the day when he's that young. I think he's not the first figure. I don't know why, but don't ask me why, but I did think of, Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, and the figure of a young man who's going off into the fog of war. And I think, yes, that is a reaction that maybe we can only have in our full empathy from the perspective of time, but I think eventually you would like to have that kind of empathy, perhaps for all the men, and on both sides of the conflict when they are that young. And I think that that's very hard to make conceptually or intellectually, but what I appreciate about and actually all these films is that is something that we can only feel in the moment by being present. And when we have a sensation of particular bodies being present with us, and kind of in the flesh, in their, I don't know, in their animal nature. And this is something that cinema can really do, and that that I think, for me at least, Vadim's film was about that. And I don't know, maybe I'm going out too far, but then again, I am a film critic. This is the only thing that I can really do. Because I felt that in all the films, what was important for me is this question of what is political cinema and how many different ways there are to make cinema politically. That ultimately there's obviously more than one way, and that in all of these films, I felt that there's always this tension between having some kind of like a critical device or a critical apparatus, and at the same time wanting to be immersive. So let's say in Adachi, I feel like he talks so much about Brecht. And when I saw this film for the first time, I thought, wait, I'm not thinking really Brechtian. I'm just thinking that he's really going out on a limb. He's using all this surrealist body language because he really wants to invite us. And there's this kind of convocation to be there with this young man and his, you know, and his psychotic breakdown. And there's a lot of questions that I had about ultimately whether, oh God, that's scary. You know, like how, if you were just to be nitpicky about the political messaging, wouldn't you say at the end that somehow, like, this whole thing is deconstructed in the end, as in this young man is just really angry at his mother, and this was all kind of personal catharsis rather than an actual political engagement, that he's operating on some level of just psychosis or a nervous breakdown that doesn't actually allow him, and that is completely futile. But that's apart from that. I think as the film, what engages me is that there are these surrealist moments where we're just kind of being immersed in the film, but there are other moments that are very stagey, that are very theatrical, that are very Brechtian, when there's a certain distance. And I think in Vadim's film, for me at least, that worked on the level of the camera, because it's such an immersive film. It has a certain duration and invites me into the summer, but there's this constant reminder that the camera is somehow, I don't want to say jealous of these young people, but there's something that it cannot touch, like that there's a certain gap and a certain silence, and the camera is always enacting that silence, and that there's a certain light that is there, but that is already dying. And like, for me, that's incredibly moving about. And whereas, you know, yes, I can say that's enormously self-pitying, and all young people are enormously self-pitying. That's what youth is. But, well, in many ways, and we've all been young, so I think the gentleman in the crowd knows what I'm talking about. But there's something there that I think is, like, for me at least, very cinematic, and that is something that the camera that's sensitive and that's conscious about its limitations can do. And what that is in the Somatalua, that's maybe the hardest film for that for me is kind of to tie it in. Although, of course, because I'm thinking all these films have something fragmentary. There is a silence, there is a gap, there's fragments and something that you cannot touch, but you're desperately trying to work with. And I guess in Somatalua, for me, it's partly about that first image, really about the image of the ship that would have been transporting enslaved people to Brazil, because there is a certain question of how we present images of violence. And I know that in Brazil, that has, you know, that conversation has been going on for a while, just because there's a lot of violence represented against Black people that just circulate, you know, on TikTok, and there's a whole kind of question of whether reproducing these images, to what extent it is traumatizing, how do you deal with them? I mean, that's certainly also a question with Adachi. And on top of that, there's also a question of like archival documentation, because at the same time, you know, there's a question of like the sparsity of the archive, how there's very little archive, in fact, how if you were to present counter narratives of Black lives, you might not, a lot of families will not find enough archival image. And I think that, you know, when Rodrigo talks about wanting to kind of do that he's interested in like poetics of pain, like I kept thinking, like, what does that mean? I mean, it's a gorgeous phrase, but I think that's pointing to the fact of him like wanting to be in that gap, like to inhabit that gap and that liminal space where you're trying to touch something, but there's not enough. And when maybe there are certain images from that sparsity, something new emerges, or like you have a metaphor that you almost requalify. Like that image of the bird on the ship is so beautiful. Like for me, that's almost like, I don't know if it's like a misplaced or displaced metonymy when something stands for something else, for a certain, like you're re-symbolize and re-qualify that passage in a very poetic way. And somehow that, through the cinema, is like, there's a restitution in the image, even though obviously there has not been real political, historical restitution in Brazil or elsewhere at this point. So anyway, I talked on and
wow.
Whatever. That's my reaction. Shot.
Thank you.
Shot at reaction, let's just say.
I thought, when I thought about this program, I thought a lot about the question, what makes a film controversial? And I found something very interesting, which is Benford's law of controversy. Very interesting. It says, passion is inversely proportional to the amount of real information available. I find that really funny and interesting. And I think there's a very interesting question in that, like, and I'm very curious about you all for whether what you know about these films influences how you perceive them, and in which way. For example, Go. In Japan, Masao Adachi is in a way well known, and I wonder, would it have made a difference had a different director made this film? And it's the same, of course, with Vadim's film, but also with the images in Rodrigo's film, which I personally cannot pinpoint when I see the film, but you maybe more. Maybe we could talk about that. What you know about these films and how it influenced the way you saw it, the way you saw them.
I don't know. I'm a festival programmer. I watch around 2,000 films a year, and of course, at some point, you know a director's work. You know about the political situation. It all influences you, but. And so for me it was very refreshing to have a Japanese and a Brazilian film in this program, what I'm not that familiar with. I guess we all have our own points of reference. Like with the Adachi film, I had to think about the Kenzaburo Oe novel 17, which is also about a 17-year-old guy becoming very radical politically, but it's also motivated mostly by sexual undertones. And he becomes very, very violent. So that was my personal association, because I happened to have found this book in a second-hand bookshop when I was 17. When it comes to the Brazilian film, I don't know. I think there's a certain power to archive montage and to montage in itself. Of course, you have your own associations and what you know influences, but I think montage is a really powerful thing to bring associations into the perception and reception of a film. And what I think is very smart about Ribeiro Andrade's film is that it brings the past into the present. And I think the way to understand the societies we live in through the past is probably the best way to look at it. So I think this film does that very poetically, very naturally, and finds its own language. So that's how I perceived it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can only really well. What
That's
I
a big
knew.
contrast to the other two films, right?
Yeah.
Because they are really in the here and now. Like your film especially, but also the Adachi film.
Why is the other not in the here and now?
Because it evokes the past. It really works with the past, and it finds images to bring the past into the now and explain or try to explain. Well, okay, this sounds very, very big, but the state of Brazilian society, its multi-ethnic makeup, and the things that are going on there on a poetic level. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What I could tell that, you know, Rodrigo's film is made of different, I mean, you already said that, of different archival material from different time periods. And so there's, you know, this kind of elliptical time, but also from, you know, the black and white archival material to, I don't actually know if there's any present day images. I guess not. In the film, and yes, having lived in Brazil, I can tell that there are certain images, such as you know, the image of the community, or what we call the favela, which is such a prevalent image in cinema. And so here's an image that's often recycled again and again, and in kind of more commercial cinema, often you've got these spectacular, you know, or maybe even in Adachi's meaning of the word sensationalist, images of, you know, helicopter views of sprawling kind of communities on the hills around Rio de Janeiro. And so I could tell that in a way he's reworking this image and very beautifully kind of making it dance and having this kind of juxtaposition. And to me, it's almost like he's liquefying that image. I mean, it starts to shimmer, and there's a certain evocation of the water, for me at least, in that image. I mean, it's a very personal reaction, but it's just, again, something that, I don't know, that like using literally the poetics of the image to destabilize something that's kind of almost a cliched representation, just on that level. But other than that, there's certainly a lot of archival material here that I can't necessarily point, oh, this is date such and such, or provenance such and such. Yeah.
Go, I'm very curious, since we are talking about historical relations and the present. You're somebody who works a lot on cinema from the 60s and 70s, and curating programs in which these films can be seen. Could you talk about that choice, why it is meaningful for you, and how it is related to your collaboration with Adachi? Can you still, or again, hear us? Are you connected? It seems we can't hear you, so maybe your mic is turned off. Could you try turning on your mic? Okay, while we wait for the system to react, I'd like to ask Heleen about a term she used when we talked about this event beforehand. You were talking about the fact that Vadim's film is not for you a type of reaction cinema. And I'm very curious what this term means for you. Could you talk about this?
Yeah, I guess when I first heard the term reaction shot, I especially, like I mentioned, in the times that we live in, for me it's more like you have to react somehow politically, right? And of course everyone is entitled to have their own personal reaction, which you had, but you shot this material before, so the film in itself, the title is a reaction to the here and now, but the film in itself for me, it's not. You know, it was before. It's poetic. It's it might work if you know a lot about Russian society. Then there's, of course, this militarization of Russian society. Like every family is touched by it. Like you have to go to the army if you're healthy, or if you can't pay the fee. You can actually buy your way out of it, out of military service in Russia, but not everyone can afford that. Some people choose to go to the army voluntarily, like Kostya. And this is, of course, in it, and you can see a reaction to the war in this film if you really want to, but it's only a matter of interpretation, in my view. You can also just see it as a poetic image of an afternoon at the lake.
What is that actually, poetry and poetic cinema? Maybe Vadim could talk about his idea of that.
That's funny. I think it's poetry is possible when you can really understand the cinema as some matter, understand the very matter of his film, understand what from which things the very shot consists, what in there, the light as itself, the feelings as itself, the presence as itself, and all this in a sequence, in a time, together with your some kind of feeling of touching, like with this with some movements of the camera. All this creates this rhythmic and visually organized sequence that can be read as poetic, because it's for me it's always trying to reach something clear, innocent, like something like feeling of connected somehow, feeling of love in general. I mean, for me, because especially here, because I'm shooting the places where I really connected, and of course for me Boris Ruger is really important poet, and I just shooting in Normandy, and I was thinking about a film like that I made in France like for 5 years, because Boris has a poem that calls The Sea. And for me, this idea of this unreachability of the sea.
He never saw the sea, right? He never went to the seaside.
He, actually, I think when he became more kind of popular poet, he was in Dutch. I think he saw the sea in St. Petersburg or in the Dutch. But it was idea of he talking about his friend who would never see the sign, Dima Rybakony, the Urals writer. Probably we talk about really certain things, but yeah, still poetry. Of course, I've seen a lot of films, but the very idea is to try to observe the things as itself. We see through this something more. See from this something more, as we use the words in our usual life, but in a certain sequence of the words we can understand something more. We can try to feel something more that we can in our usual life. And for me, this is a film, the very camera that presents also in this film is very this instrument of manifestation of the feelings that otherwise was going just going by without no, they wouldn't be seen in other way. I just suddenly met, and you're right. Of course, I wasn't shooting as political film. It's not political film. I made it as itself, as part of my other part of diaries, when I make some kind of panorama, farewell of my places within this mini DV camera, to the things that happens with me, the things that I saw, and so on. Like the time of summer, for me it's like a warmest time, especially from now when we also flew country, and like we had a not really easy time, you know. So
but now when we're confronted also with Ukrainian filmmakers, I constantly have this actually very stupid question in my head, like, should we screen non-political films made by Russians? You know, is it the time for it or not? You know, like a lot of Ukrainian filmmakers, they're at the front, they cannot make films there's not really a lot of poetry in their lives, and it's as a programmer, this is really a big dilemma that we're confronted with. And I think
I will just say, but I mean, I certainly agree that that's a curatorial, totally valid question, and it's a curatorial choice. I would just think that even though, I mean, Vadim's filmmaking is vulnerable in that way, I think that what's kind of interesting is that it seems like he has a diaristic practice, and so it's something that like evolves, and so there's something fragmentary about this film. But if it were to become a part of a larger diary at some point, or I mean, it's kind of like a diary itself is an act of daily revision. I mean, it's just
But it's for me, it's a special diary. I'm not doing it all the time, only the summer, only when I return, because it was a special time when I was kind of returning to the city where I was born, childhood. Yeah, but it's still, this film is still political anyway. And because it works as political film now because of the context. And not only, for me it was, as thought before, that was some heartbreaking thing that he was really, what Kostya was really like preparing for this, and I was like, okay, you are okay with it, or here this only this, and the last his dialogue that he said, like when we come into Nizhny Tagil, he has some kind of feeling that he already have a road, he has already know where he goes, and it's awful when you already know where he goes, like you're already into the system that he was born actually in this military town, and like they said, that's fine, there is no other job actually. He told me he was working on the manufacturing or some kind of, it was really hard work and so on, and he was like accorded by someone else. He didn't observe the life by himself. I mean, like to really even to go by his own will somewhere to see Nizhny Tagil. It's not far away, just to see the street, the city center or something. He like already also always has a route. This was really awful. But and that's back to the question to propaganda, and militarization in Russia. Actually, in my film Fall, there is one scene where it's also film connected to childhood, and there is one scene when a boy 10 years old sitting on the monument as represented the tank, and it shows like that in a very Russian city, or not in Russia, post-Soviet city, we can find something from this, like tanks, muscles, or helicopters or something that reminds the Second World War. But yeah, it still is present in the architecture of the city. People living with this, people making kids playing on it, kids getting used to the presence of the military, presence of the war, presence of the power that represent government, that represent military people and military as itself. And they know that like they are oppressed when like you're going to 18 years old, you must go if you're not flu or something, if you're not in university, you must. It's something that exists in the existence of this power, of this pressure, especially of this military town like Svobodny. Svobodny, it means free, but it's completely, it's
But I would think also that, like, from the curatorial point of view, certainly in the context of a festival, one would always hope that the audience is given the opportunity to be watching a film like Vadim's in the context of other films that are here. Certainly at Berlinale, there are plenty of, not plenty, but there are a number of opportunities to see movies like Vitaly Mansky's On the Eastern Front. And okay, you might like it or not, but it certainly is, if you're quibbling with, a more kind of complete diaristic account what the front lines look like for the young soldiers, and Ukrainian soldiers, that's at least one, I think, that, film that was produced and that is here.
I have a question for Dennis. Like, if you speak about reaction shots, Was there the consideration to include films made by collectives?
It's not the. It wasn't the principle by which we were looking for films. We were looking for films which were fascinating to us and which made us discuss. So that these films found together was a longer process, and the title of this evening came out of the films. It was not a title we had set previously. So this is something we were interested in discussing after picking the films and putting them together. So in that sense, it's not a topical program at all, but it's more about how we see these films together and what they do to us. These were all films we discussed about a lot, and which keep also me and myself thinking about what political cinema is, what about maybe also what apolitical cinema is, and also what poetic cinema is. And yeah, I'm still processing and finding the answers. So it's really nice to pick your brains in this moment, and I'm totally fascinated by this. You were talking about propaganda also, which is a term I would like to talk about, and maybe I'd like to try and bring Go back if you still are there and can speak. Could you say something like check or hi?
Hi.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, and sometimes image and so sound is skipping and so I'm sorry. So it's difficult to discuss and.
Let's try.
Yeah.
So when we talked about propaganda, I was curious to hear how Masao Adachi talks about the idea of propaganda, and whether you see his film in relation to that term, what that term means for you, and how, when you are working as a curator, you create a political framing for the films you show. So it's a set of questions. Maybe you can pick one and answer.
Yeah, I think both aspects, and for example, and about Masao Adachi, and for example, so Red Army PFLP Declaration of World War in 1971, and Adachi and Wakamatsu shoot this film as propaganda. Of course, as a political aspect, this film is propaganda, but as the aspect, cinematic theory and practice, so it's kind of cinema. So I think I would like to analyze both aspects, kind of medium of propaganda at the same time, frame of film and Revolution Plus One. So I think I can say same thing. And so Revolution Plus One is kind of propaganda provoking Japanese political and social situation. At the same time, so this is film. And so we can analyze and theory and practice through cinema. And I think I would like to talk about both aspects. And so I would like to when I curate the program, so I created the museum and the cinema, other places, and activist space, and university and others. And so I would like to discuss several aspects of these kind of film.
If you're still there, how do you see the film, Masao Adachi's film, in relation to the other films? Do you think this was a critical framework we have created here? Maybe forwarding Heleen's question, like how does this setting work for you? Does Adachi's film benefit from this setting? Do you think that questions come to the front which are helpful for discussing this film?
Oh, sorry. So can you could you ask answer briefly
Could you talk about the setting we have created for Adachi's film? Do you feel it is a critical setting which helps to find an interesting angle on the film? Do you feel how do you feel about the relation between the films?
Yeah, I think yes, about the new film or whole his film.
The new one.
Yeah, I think so about a new film. I think also and so it's very it's important to analyze so both cinematic and aesthetic and kind of propaganda and context of propaganda. And so Adachi and suggested and so cinema equal politics and cinema equal social issue and cinema is life and others. I think also I would like to analyze and so all aspect of his film and including as a new film.
One thing which is also very present in Adachi's film is the aspect of violence. Ela, you briefly mentioned it before because it's also very present in Rodrigo's film, in the opening shot of Rodrigo's film, like the ship we see. So we are very directly exposed to a violent history. And I feel that the films are in a way connected through addressing a certain reality of violence, which is also the case in Vadim's film because it's basically absent from the film. And I'm curious how you feel about this presence and absence of violence in the films. How did you experience the violence in Adachi's film? For example, the destruction of these photographs of people. Was that something you would relate to agitation filmmaking? What did you think when you saw these images? What did the film do to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so representation of violence is a very important issue for Adachi's film, and so this film so about the new film, so it's very important and so to use and the image footage of from Abe's assassination. But on the other hand, so footage using footage, and so he wants violence. So what is violence and through an image? Of course, as violence is violence, but on the other hand, so representation of violence is different aspect. So I think also he wants to discuss so so what is violence and what is violence in cinema.
That question goes to the panel.
To me, in Adachi's film, it sometimes really felt anime-like, but but reenacted anime-like, in order also to create maybe this estrangement effect. I do think the film is extremely Brechtian, by the way.
No, I did say that after I rewatched it.
Yeah.
I felt it was.
Yeah. So that kind of puts a distance between us and the violence, and of course also the kind of ridiculous montage of the real assassination and him with the DIY gun. That kind of creates a comic effect, which is totally not called for in this situation. But I thought that was very interesting. Also the effect it had on me while watching. And I think Ribeiro Andrade's film is much more violent than Adachi wants, to be honest. And yours, I wouldn't call it violent, it's more menacing. There's like this threat in the background. It looks very idyllic in the moment, but you know that something's coming. It's like the Пока свободный.
And here you can read it on both sides if you put it by свободный. There's this presence. It's really weird how you suddenly see something. We never see the subject. We only see the eyes of people. They're like, for me, this the little girl was also with guys. Remember, in her eyes, I like suddenly saw that like she understands everything, but she can't do nothing. She's afraid of. They're all feeling like everything is fine. They're all feeling this presence of the kind of this machine, like government and military. They're really close to. They really grow up with this, and they're like, yeah, it's really like simple and children playing. And this motif actually not only in this film, for example in film Winter that I made, there are also children playing on the mountain, but on the other side there are a manufacturer that actually producing the tanks that really like have a voice, has like a monster or something that you can hear how it goes, but they're having fun and so on. Yeah, but here is even more, because it's really this time, the last time. There is not question of decades or years. There is like a real last time when it happens. The life like this, like we have seen it, and this disappearing. Every second, every second is disappearing, and we have this. There is nothing to do. The time passing away, and we are also talking about the time. In the very last sequence, they're saying, like, "Oh, it's already too late. Yeah, we need where we go." And before she said, "We still have." So where we go? I don't know. We still have time. They're like, we still have one day. We still have one hour, like less than 1 hour. What can we do in this time? How we? Yeah, it's. And they have nothing to. There is completely impossible to change anything. Like they're like already going. I don't know how to explain, but Kostya also taken that he has like kind of route. He knows already somehow, like he leads by something. It goes without kind of reflection or some movement back and forth, or something like that. That was what made this film also political, and especially short film should be short. Like the very this presence of this sequence that ends so fast make this film something that we can discuss. Yeah.
You just talked about movement within the film, which I find very interesting. Just a second, I'll add one question to the pile of questions we are juggling. Did you feel that any of these films, because the aspect of violence is not only something which is depicted within the film, but it's also the question of how a film is structured, whether it imposes something on us, which I personally feel in Adachi's film very much, like it's shooting at me with all it has. There's so much sound, there's so much visual attraction. Is maybe the music, yes. The
direct address to the camera.
How did you feel about the films? Vadim's film, Adachi's film. Were these authoritarian films for you? Were they imposing something on you? And was this a provocation you enjoyed? Was this a challenge for you? Or did you feel these films were like emancipatory? Like asking you to roam?
Sorry, just because before we move to the mechanics, I'd like to answer maybe the broader question about the importance of the presence of violence and the way it's inscripted in Rodrigo's film and the Brazilian film, just to mention that, like, what I think is important about it, that's part of the bigger conversation, is this idea that somehow, slavery was abolished. I mean, for many years, there seemed to be this prevalent idea, or at least that's what's often being questioned and discussed today in Brazil, how there used to be this more prevalent idea of how, there was just lei áurea and somehow slavery ended in this very peaceful way, and the stories and the histories that are being kind of represented today and rediscovered or found through the archival methods today are in fact histories of kind of ground up resurrections, and so of escapes and revolts of enslaved persons, and the importance of quilombos, which would have been communities of free slaves or escaped slaves. And I think Rodrigo's stories very much are a part of the recovery of this imaginary, and the violence instituted and is present in these films as politically important, because that's what he wants to talk about, the kind of active participation of Black people in their own emancipation in Brazil in that historical moment. And that's what's being recovered partly. And I feel like there are certain moments where, we are in this poetic territory, in this mystical territory, but for example, this kind of pathway into the forest. I mean, it almost feels like we're being inducted into some of those of Quilombo communities that would have been part of the Brazilian narrative, as much as, you know, the Queen of Portugal signing a document and that often being represented as the definitive part of Brazilian history is, if not much more, etc. That's just the context. Now, I'm sorry, your question was about whether we are confronted, whether we feel confronted by the films, yeah? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's to answer.
I actually appreciate it when filmmakers try to find a form that's kind of provocative, that fits the provocative message, basically, or try to find new films that are not as predictable as a traditional dramaturgy would be. Just look for this freedom of form, look for a form that fits the message as best as it can, and it chose 3 films that are extremely different, but I don't think they're authoritarian at all, but maybe I'm a bit immune to that, I don't know.
How did you get immune to that?
By watching 2,000 films per year.
I see. If you have questions, now is the moment. Otherwise, I'd suggest we continue outside and have a drink together, and watch more films in the next days. We have 2 more. There's a question. Mike is coming.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
I'm also part of the selection committee, just so you know where the question is coming from. I heard a few things in this conversation that were not at all related to at least my thoughts or process in why I was also in favor of especially showing Still Free in this program. I think part of the discussion, or what I didn't understand at all, were your notions about that there are non-political films. I'm really a bit surprised to hear that, because to me it seems obvious that every time you put a camera on the world, it's a political act. So that's just one thing. I think it's for me it's strange that there seem to be non-political or apolitical films. And the reason, at least I was in favor of showing Still Free, was that I think it's a political film, but on a more abstract level. It is in a difficult scenario right now. That is, we are always comparing it to the reality we know that happened. That changes the film that we talked about, but I think there is a very peaceful idea behind it that I felt, and I find it very important to get an image like that from Russia now. So that is what the reason I thought we show this film. One addendum to that, I think a lot of the ideas come from the titles, the title of the film, but the title of the program. I'm not happy with that at all. Not with the title of the film. I'm not so skeptical with the title of the program. I don't think programs should have titles like that. I think films can speak for themselves in a dialogue. So maybe that's one idea I had while listening to you, because if it's called reaction shot or something else, I mean, that is not, I mean, we didn't make a title reaction shot and then we searched for 3 films that fit that, but we had 3 films that fit that, and then titles were proposed. I think that is just, in my opinion, not the best idea. Maybe it doesn't have to be like that. So these are just some comments about what I've heard. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, of course, we were not that much saying about it, but we were saying about that I started to shoot it as a not political movie, as a part of the IRS, but it turns to be, and of course it is, and there is always the epigraph that I use. They're trying to, of course it looks like, and that is made for to show this, also to show the faces of these young people from another side that were in Russia, just that how they looked like, that they are real people, they have feelings, they have presence, they have like it's really important to understand that people dying everywhere, and everywhere is like all struggling. Yeah, and mostly because of authoritarian regimes that makes after like highest point of it that make a war, like started a war, like when you like have all rights in one hand, something like that. Yeah, of course. For me, it was also important to show it in this way. Now, even if it's not enough or something, that's a thing that I can do. It's a thing that I already saw, and I want to share it with others. Just it as, yeah, that's important. Thank you for selecting it also.
Well, if I may quote Godard, we must make political films, we must make films politically. Those are two different things. I do think there are apolitical films, I'm sorry. But of course, art doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's there's a back and forth between the filmmakers and the reception of a film.
Sorry, can you give me an example of a non-political film? Just so I know. Like, what is a non-political film? I've never seen one, and I'm not, maybe not seeing 2,000 films a year, but 1,900 or something like that.
I think there's a lot of, for instance, romantic comedies that do not have direct political message, that are not made politically, that are made as a commercial product. And of course you can say yes, then that's also politics, but that's not making films politically.
Yeah, I don't know, but okay.
Maybe they have politics you disagree with.
Yeah. Once in like one interview actually with Nikita, who is present there, like asked about what is the filmmaking. Yeah, and if you make a film, it's a political gesture because you do something that you're gonna show the people. It's gonna have some impact, and then. But of course, I don't know.
Then why do you have Putin?
Why do you have Putin? I'm not collecting Putins in my pockets. It's like I have a phone. I don't think that I have Putin. I don't have Putin, and hopefully I don't have Putin. Both me, like that's why I'm not agree with it. We left the country, like. And
yeah, but making a film is not a political act in itself. I don't.
No, yeah, not. Yeah, of course, not all every film. Film it's bigger than this. Just I mean, political or any context. Film that's something that make things that we've invisible before make it visible. That's something that extra gaze that you can have. That's a tool to see deeper, more profound into the light, and bringing the light to the people, like to sharing the look, sharing the way of discovering the things, the world, like really powerful tool that can make things visible, make the really a lot of things. And especially with this, it's a gaze. You're sharing only things that I saw, and really important who is watching. I mean, there is this, especially the gaze. It's not anything else. You're sharing your gaze, and like people can see something more. They can like a bit change their own gazes. I mean, just to trying to see the things that happens, trying to be more present into the very moment, in the moment. And
I got a question from here, or not a question, and sort of a comment. I mean, what you said now is just like when I saw the film, and I do like the film. I can sense all this. You can sense all the trees, the water, the atmosphere, and everything is so nice. But then I was watching it, and I thought, this is especially the apolitical society which you can see there. This is something I felt, at least, and this is what then, when the film finished like that, left me a little bit. I don't find the right word at the moment, but it left me a bit like empty when I finished the film. and I missed something. Maybe this is what I would say when I watched the film. And like I said, I enjoyed the film, and yeah, but something, I missed something, and this is maybe this emptiness which we all have now in this particular situation at the moment. Yeah, this is what I would just wanted to say.
I have a question about that a little bit, because I felt like with the film that was here in Critics Week and with Dominic Graf, I felt the point was that what is an apolitical society? What does that mean? To what extent? We're the citizens of this country in a political society. What did it take to have a Hitler the way you have Putin? And I think Dominic Graf gives a spectacularly complex answer to that actually politics on the ground level looks a lot different than you expect, that it wasn't, so often not the capital, the evil with a capital E, but in fact the politicking on the ground of these very different art organizations, and that each writer had a very complex and personal answer for how politics played out in his or her life, and how they, signed a particular statement or didn't, or kept silent or didn't, etc. And so, I don't know, but I want to prod that a little bit, because that's a huge statement to say that a film just shows an apolitical society, or I don't know.
Well, I actually was thinking about the German past when I was thinking about that. And I think I have a lot of images in my head, especially from the films of the 30s and 40s. And therefore it left this sort of emptiness, this sort of that I felt somehow powerless in this moment when I watched them, this film in particular. But then when we think about Adachi's film and Adachi's films, and about reactions, what people are maybe capable to do in these sort of powerless situations. I think there's this certain bridge now to Adachi's film, maybe. I think in Japan it definitely is not as apolitical, the society, as Russia, or let's say not such repressed, but maybe, don't know, probably some friends of here would to a certain point agree that the society is quite apolitical. And so what make people do in a certain moment to react like the one in Adachi's film did, or other attacks and reactions to political events. So maybe there's a bridge.
I'm not an expert on Japanese film, but I do think there's really a bizarre lack of films dealing critically with the Second World War, for instance. And I think that's very telling in Japanese cinematography. That a lot is actually still glorifies like the samurai days and the emperor and the old hierarchies in society up until this very day, like in genre films. So I think that is very telling, and this film is of course the complete opposite. It's actually very refreshing to see such a punk film from Japan.
Go, could you maybe jump in and comment on how this film relates to current cinema in Japan, but also in which sense for you it comments on the political moment?
Sorry, I can hear the discussion, but so in Japanese situation, it's very tough, and of course and so this film, Revolution Plus, like Revolution Plus One, and so Adachi can shoot, so only he shoot, because he is very old and so film director. Young filmmaker. So for young filmmakers, so it's not easy to shoot this kind of so political and issue, and of course, and so budget. So if so political film, so it's not easy to get the budget, for example. So this film, Revolution Plus One, supported by one live house, so they supported to shoot this film. But so other filmmakers, so it's not easy to get the money, get the budget from these kind of company. For example, and the TV company and other production companies, so they are very they like to shoot and so kind of commercial and conservative film, and so I think it's tough situation for Japanese filmmaker to shoot this kind of political and social issue.
Do you feel a film like that has the power in Japan to change the landscape of filmmaking to the better?
I think to distribute these independent films, so it's better. But on the other hand, independent film is not literally independent recently. I think independent Japanese filmmaker I think have to think what is independent. So what is independent film? What is experimental film? So because system of filmmaking is independent, but the content issue is not so much.
What do you mean by content issue? The form of the films, like the films, how they are made, what they show.
Form and issue, and so because in Japan, so many art house and mini theater, so and they can introduce a lot of independent film, so by commercial. But on the other hand, they don't like to introduce kind of avant-garde and experimental film. And so I think in the next situation, I think independent filmmaker try to shoot. Of course, not same format and not same format on Revolution Plus One, but I think I would like to push these kind of ambitious filmmaking in Japan in the future.
Can I
sure
return to the question of impetus and then the back and forth to Russia? The same question about filmmakers. That of course we all in this emptiness and all in this we are faced with this dark screen, like nothing to do, with silence. That's how it is. And
you mean you feel politically powerless?
Yeah, and in the end there is and but actually in Russia it wasn't no other possibility to make film as I do and have money for it. Completely not. It's really important to understand that if you wanna make some kind of big film, no. I mean, you can go to Ministry of Culture or some government of a foundation or like another fund by Kino Prime or Sakurov or some really few producers like Hype Film, that we have a film of Serebrennikov or some other, and it's actually almost at all. It's like only too few names. And when you're talking about, we need to make a film politically. I guess Straub said, right? You mean Straub?
No, it was Godard.
Godard. Anyway, he also make real political films. Straub was kind of a bit a different way. But Nikita, I want to ask something, but let me finish, please. Yeah, and I wanted just to say that I try my best. I was trying till the very end, till I could continue to be and to shoot making films there. But there was a point. Now I can't see that I can do something else. Only I'm now shooting on the cameras of surveillance in Tagil sometimes, just to capture the reality and make some kind of more political films, actually, that I usually never do. Yeah, but the very
the times you live in force you to react.
Force,
right?
exactly. It's really forced, like, faced you with it. Yeah, and so I hope it will be something in the future, but now it's, only underground, like more underground than it was. I know some guys all over the Russia that's still there, but it's, I don't know. I don't have answers how it will be like. It's really, really under the ground, and it's almost hopeless, like.
Almost.
I never. No, it's a bad feeling when you like putting down and like all down and all the world is ended. Yeah, it's kind of ended, but I can't believe that it's like end. It's because usually it was many times like that, with different kind of wars all over the world. Yeah, it's definitely, it's incredibly awful, but I hope that the times will be ended. As everything, nothing goes forever. Yeah, but it's really difficult, more than. Yeah, and it was, and now I just can imagine like what the young guys. Actually, when I was in Khanty-Mansiysk, we just in first days of war. It started before war. One journalist in the kind of local TV asked me, "Tell something to young people, like who want to be an artist or somebody." And then I like, what? It was already kind of 26. I was presented summer this day, and I was talking already against the war. Like it was really hard speech. And she asked me like that, just we are all okay, everything good. Just like give advice, And I'm like, I have nothing to do. I have nothing to say. Like I was probably try to leave. Or to leave country, or leave some found solution, but I just can, the truth is that I can imagine how it will be with the guys who's now 18, 19, they're starting to do. But you understand, like, or especially people who are not students, it's all like, I don't know.
Yeah, but Vadim, there's been a war since 2014. There was Chechnya in the 90s. And like in the 90s, people had zero money. Like inflation was huge. Like people were queuing for bread. And still people made films. And I sometimes wonder, where did the anger and the energy go that was in the 90s,
Yeah. Yeah, it was really crazy time. And it was time when people really... I was talking with... Sergei Loznitsa in Dvortsovoi, for example. Dvortsovoi found the money for his film by just accident a meeting with some kind of banker or oligarch, something like that. He just someone just told him from the gig that you can come to this guy and ask him for $5,000. He'll probably just give it to you, and it was like that. It was completely crazy. Some guy, a student come, and even in universities couldn't provide you the film, and actually geek like major collecting the film and work with the film has a huge archive and so on. There it wasn't. Yeah, it was crazy. I actually convinced that it will be some new films, that people will not end it to make film, but I'm just saying that it's just like going in the complete darkness with the, I don't know, with a lighter. yes, kind of it. You like, and how to find the form. Yeah, but yeah, I know people that right now making also in documentary. They're now they're somewhere in Moscow. They're trying to struggle somehow, kind of to capture it, to trying to show the truth. It will never kind of completely when people leave, when at least one man have handled the camera alive, the people will, of course, it's something essence. If you can't, the point is not you have food or not, because sometimes I also have a really difficult times, and solving. But this is essence. I just can't stop. I cannot not to do it. And I of course, what you will find solution. People will find solution to, and it also helps to survive to this deal. You have a film, but it's really, really, I don't know. It's terribly hard. I can't imagine myself into this, but yeah. I hope that I know that someone's continue and will be better times for better, and it will be also some new in cinema and new aesthetics and new forms, and everything will be developed, and we will less talk about the things as a war and violence and death and this question like that. So more about the art itself, more about cinema itself, and more about, I don't know, maybe some in the future, very distant.
It will come. We will see. I would like to thank you all for being here with us, and you for staying. Okay, one last question.
I was raising my hand for half an hour.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask. I was just curious about, like someone said something about how there are no Japanese films critical of the World War II. I just maybe I misunderstood, but aren't all the great Japanese war classics like The Human Condition by Masaki Kobayashi or Fires on the Plain by Kon Ichikawa, aren't they like critical anti-war films? And also the second question, like about rom-coms, I think rom-coms are one of the most political genres, in fact, because they have a real ability to influence like gender norms and gender relationships in society, and they don't just represent them, but which is also political, but they also influence them. And if you take rom-coms from different like eras of filmmaking, they will be very they will be touching on like the issues in the society. Even here at the Berlinale, the opening film was a rom-com, which I think was a incredibly political decision, because we have this opening ceremony with like Zelensky speeches, with like Iranian speeches, and then we have this extremely conservative pro-status quo rom-com, which is actually makes fun, very insensitive movie that makes fun of like sexual misconduct and like mental illness. And I think that was a very like political statement in a way.
Yeah, you're right, of course. Like a lot of genre films are actually very political, and I would say that TV entertainment goes even further when it comes to changing gender roles and society's idea of that. It has much more influence than experimental small films that are only seen by a handful of people. Of course, they are right. I didn't say that there are no films in Japan, in Japanese film history, that are critically dealing with the Second World War, but there are surprisingly few of them. Like you mentioned Kobayashi, of course, but if we look really at Kurosawa or Ozu, you know, it's kind of lacking. Of course, there are a few films, but if you compare it to Germany, for instance, or even to Russia or Belarus, like how many films there are made there, it's surprising.
In Belarus, there hasn't been a single World War II movie in 20 years. And then in Japan there has been
Occupazio
dozens,
Mysteri was one when
20 years ago. That was the
twice
last one.
2005, I think. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
It was exactly 2003.
Yeah. But compared to the production of Japanese films, per
The
year,
output,
it's
yeah.
not really a lot.
Okay, it's been a long evening. Let's continue outside. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Sorry for not seeing you earlier. Thank you for staying. Thank you, Vadim, Heleen, Ela, and Go. I wish you a good night, and to you a good day.